Every other year, some of the most interesting presentations in all of Magic for Magicians happens in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Conference of Magic History. And the man who runs that conference is also not only a great magician, but an author of books for the public about magic, including Hiding the Elephant, which I recommend you all run out and read, and the most recent one, The Last Greatest Magician on Earth. One of the most important people in the art today and a good friend of mine, and I think you'll like this. I know I will. Jim Steinmeyer.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. So, October 16th, 1865, something very important happens in the world of magic. It's in London. It's at the Egyptian Hall, which was a funny little theater in Piccadilly. It was originally built as a museum to house Egyptian artifacts, and it was done all in faux Egyptian architecture, which they thought enhanced that effect. And when the museum moved out, it was transferred into little theater spaces. For some reason, magicians started working these theater spaces, including important magicians. One of those performances was on October 16th, 1865. That was the night that the Sphinx came to London. It was a little theater, it held about 60 people, but it was full. It was full, and we know that because of Colonel Stodare's, he was the performer, Colonel Stodare's amazing publicity plan. He had ads in the front of the Times about a month before announcing just a single line, "The Sphinx has left Egypt." And then a week later, the Sphinx is en route. And a week after that, the Sphinx has arrived in London. And then finally, the Sphinx can be seen tonight at Egyptian Hall in Piccadilly. And so the theater was full, and Colonel Stodare did his act, and it was a traditional magic act. It was a combination of sleight of hand and mechanical apparatus, very skillfully done. And at the end of the performance, he retired to the side of the stage, and the curtain opened on an empty stage, completely empty stage, except for a table. Not like this table, but not dissimilar either. A three-legged, simple wooden table without a drape on it in the middle of an alcove on the stage. And Stodare picked up a little traveling case, a little wooden box about 10 inches square, covered in leather with a handle on it, and he placed it in the center of the table, this completely undraped table, and he opened the front of the box and stepped away. And when he did, the audience was astonished to see inside a human head with its eyes closed, wearing an Egyptian headdress. That was the Sphinx. Now, I have to put this in context. Audiences at that time would have come to Egyptian Hall. In fact, just months earlier, they might have come to Egyptian Hall to see an exhibit of wax figures. And this was an astonishingly realistic wax figure. It seemed to be inside of the box. Remember, it was a tiny little audience just several feet away. And then he said, "Sphinx, awake." And the eyes opened and looked right and left at the audience. Now, I put this in context again. At that time, you could have gone to Egyptian Hall and you might have seen automata, which were mechanical figures that simulated life. And the people who came to Egyptian Hall would have seen exhibits just like that, either at that theater or down the street. And then the Sphinx opened up its lips and began to recite a poem. Now, Stodare was very well known not only as a magician but a ventriloquist, and so the first suspicion fell on him, and the audience looked over to him to see what he was doing, but it was no use. Because he was standing way at the side of the stage, they were closer to the Sphinx than in fact he was, and they could hear the sound coming from its lips. They could see every motion that produced the words, and the Sphinx recited a brief poem and then closed his eyes again. Stodare closed the box, carried it forward, gave a dramatic finale to the effect, opened it up, and instead of the head, he found a pile of ashes, which he spilled onto the stage, and that was the end of the illusion. Now, the Sphinx was an amazing illusion because of what it did in the world of magic, and it was all because of one person. It's a name that's almost forgotten today, even in the world of magicians. You'll only find this name in a footnote, and that name is Thomas William Tobin. That trick was not invented by Colonel Stodare, it was sold to Colonel Stodare. And the young man that invented it, he was very young at the time, was a man named Thomas William Tobin. He's a very interesting fellow. He was something of a child prodigy, and when he was 14 years old, he was apprenticed to a chemist by his family. And having mastered the work being done in that office, he was then apprenticed the next year when he was 15 to an architectural firm in London. and he was a natural draftsman. He was a very talented artist. When he was 18, he found work at the London Polytechnic, and that's where everything started to happen. The London Polytechnic in 1862 was premiering a brand new illusion, and it was called Pepper's Ghost. He worked for a man named John Henry Pepper. And in Christmas in 1862, they presented this amazing illusion. Now, Pepper's Ghost you've probably all heard about, and you're probably all familiar with in some form. It was an amazing Victorian slight special effect. This was not yet the purview of magicians, these effects. It was a large sheet of glass that was suspended in front of the stage so that you didn't see it, a piece of transparent glass, and it was angled slightly towards the audience, angled slightly at the top, like this, so that it would reflect an object in the orchestra pit. And what that object was it was an actor robed in white, made up like a ghost, who was brilliantly illuminated, so that that ghost-like figure was superimposed with the images on stage. If actors were on the stage behind the glass, they could, in effect, interact with that transparent image of the ghost. Pepper's Ghost premiered in 1862, and it was an astonishing success. For the first time, audiences really saw transparent ghosts on stage moving around performers. Now, you're probably familiar with this in some form. You've seen it all at Disneyland. That's, in fact, what's happening in the Haunted Mansion. You probably have seen it in other things because Pepper's Ghost went on to create other real inventions, like heads-up displays in cars, in dashboards. The video games that I was playing when I was in the 1980s used an angled piece of glass to superimpose the video image onto a painted background. Or anything in the film industry done on an optical bench with a beam splitter is really a variation of Pepper's Ghost. It takes a piece of transparent glass and it superimposes two images in the same spot. That's essentially what was happening. What's forgotten is what one of the amazing things about Pepper's Ghost in 1862. The inventor of it, the real inventor of it, was a man named Dirks. And Dirks thought that it would always have to be illuminated with sunlight because a sheet of glass is not very reflective. It's not like a mirror. And so it needs a tremendous amount of light on the object to cast a reflection in that glass. You can test this yourself when you look outside of a window at night. If it's dark outside and you're brilliantly illuminated, you see your own reflection. But if you're not brilliantly illuminated, it doesn't work. And so Dirks recognized that you needed a tremendous source of light, and he thought it had to be the sun. And of course, if Pepper's Ghost had depended on sunny days in London, it wouldn't have been a success. So instead, Professor John Henry Pepper knew another new invention, which was the oxyhydrogen lamp, which was just being used in the 1860s. We refer to it today as the limelight, which was a chemical lamp that glowed very brilliantly in oxygen and hydrogen. And this young man, Thomas William Tobin, I'm putting this all together now for you. This young man who had just come from a chemist's office knew a new way to combine oxygen and hydrogen, and he was going to put it all together, and he had an efficient way of doing that, and that's why they hired him at the London Polytechnic to work on Pepper's Ghost. He was the one who illuminated the ghost in the pit. But he was smart. He was smart, and he had something that other people at that time didn't have in that show business circle, which was he had training as an architect. And so Pepper's Ghost inspired a lot of thought. And that big, strange piece of glass, which had to be suspended just perfectly so the audience wasn't aware of it, people began to realize that if that glass were turned, if it were turned in different positions, it would be much more practical. Instead of putting the ghost beneath the stage in a kind of orchestra pit so that it was reflected up, if you could take that glass and turn it sideways and angle it to the side, you could put the ghost in the wings. And then the ghost could be standing in the wings, and that image of the ghost would be reflected and superimposed on the actors. Of course, that was patented, and it didn't work. It didn't work because stages are always quite wide, and these angles are quite narrow. And so a wide angle means that the people over here would be looking at the ghost standing in the wing over there, or the people over here would be looking at the ghost standing in the wing over there. There was no piece of glass large enough to really accommodate this, and there was no stage that was narrow enough to make this trick work. But there was this very smart young man who knew how to plot angles now and knew how to plot architectural spaces, and now suddenly, for the first time, saw how reflections worked on a stage and had an idea. And so later that year, he took this idea to a magician, the greatest magician in Great Britain, John Henry Anderson, and he offered it to him for sale. And John Henry Anderson turned him down. He didn't think it was trustworthy. He didn't think it was a good idea. And he later told a colleague it was the biggest mistake of his life, is that he didn't buy the Sphinx. At that time, Tobin was asking 80 pounds for it. 80 pounds was a lot of money, after all. And John Henry Anderson was, after all, Scottish. And he didn't go for it. So it went to his competition, and his competition was a young magician named Colonel Stodare. And Stodare was exactly the right man to do it. He had been working at Egyptian Hall, and the Sphinx was introduced at his 200th performance on the stage of Egyptian Hall, and it was an absolute sensation. All of London came to see it. It was written about in all of the leading magazines and newspapers. They all speculated about the secret, and they were all wrong. One of the people who came to see it, who couldn't wait to see it, was an amateur magician named Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens promptly wrote a letter to his daughter about how he thought it was done, how he was convinced it was done, and he was wrong. And the reason they were so badly fooled is because it was a whole new type of magic performed by magicians. Previous to that, every magician had done one of two things. They had done sleight of hand, or they had used mechanical apparatus, mechanical effects, trick boxes with false compartments, springs, levers, automata, to accomplish their magic. And the really skillful magicians used both of those and interwove them into presentation to create a bigger effect. But for the first time, what magicians actually put on stage were optical illusions. And they suddenly had a whole new range opened up to them. Thank you.